Read a little bit more. Now, there's an argument here. Is Betsy DeVos stupid or evil? And
All of the above.
Here's what I say. Yes, those are not mutually exclusive propositions. Betsy DeVos can be both stupid and evil. And the argument of her being stupid is the way that she expresses herself and her lack of knowledge. The argument that her being evil is that that ignorance is by design, and she is attempting to deconstruct and degrade our public school system, or a system of public schools, public education, and her ignorance is in service of that. And so these are not mutually exclusive propositions. They don't need to be. And here she is. She is looking at performance reviews. And the question is, will you look at sub-performance groups? Groups that are, that would theoretically create a different baseline. Because the idea is that, look, this is the way that so-called education reform takes place. You judge the schools on very narrow, harsh metrics. Then you say these schools are in disarray. So you get to the problem is they're broken, right? As opposed to there needs to be reform. They need to be chucked out. And so what we're going to do to address these broken schools is to either shut them down, right? Or to strip them of funding and give that funding to schools that have a different set of metrics in measuring their performance review. That is because in her case, in her interest, they are all run by God. And funnel that money into there. I mean, she is on record as saying, I'm not against public education, I'm against public schools. And in other words, I am for taking taxpayer money. I just don't want to put it into public schools. I want to put it into parochial schools.
I was opining.
And sort of like in the way that Yashalim was explaining to us about Torah, I'm willing to allow other private schools who are, not parochial schools to get some of that funding to basically, pave the way for me to fund parochial schools. Here's Betsy DeVos being asked a question by Representative Bobby Scott from Virginia at the House Education and Workforce Committee. And here she is either ignorant or evil.
The law requires states to reduce the achievement gap. Some plans that have been approved provide that the ranking of schools will not include subgroup performance. How do you comply with the law to require a reduction in achievement gaps if the ranking of schools does not include the calculation of subgroup performance?
Sir, all of the plans that I have approved follow what the law requires, and we will continue to do so.
How does it conform to the law if subgroup performance is not part of the calculation?
All of the plans comport with the law as this body passed. If you are
Is subgroup performance part of the calculation that the states...
As required by the law, yes.
Okay, and if a state does not include subgroup performance in the calculation, how is that in compliance with the law which requires them to address achievement gaps?
Again, sir, all of the plans that I have approved follow the law as this body passed.
Well, are you going to answer the question? How do you address an achievement gap if subgroup performance isn't addressed?
It is addressed as required by the law.
And how is that?
Whatever the law states, it requires.
Pause it. Let me just explain what this means. What the subgroup what subgroup performance means. you can look at an entire education, let's say, a school district, okay, or municipality and the school performance. But if you don't break it down into subgroups, and that could be economic subgroups, that could be racial subgroups, that could be geographical subgroups, you don't really get a sense of what the actual story is in terms of the performance of students, because every person who is not lying and is associated with education understands that your outputs, how students perform, is a function of your inputs. How do the students show up at school when they enter into kindergarten or pre-K? And how do they show up at school every morning? Are they coming from a home where they're getting proper nutrition? Are they coming from a home where they're exposed to words and concepts? And are they coming from a home that is where the folks are living in poverty? Are they coming from a home where it is the 5-year-old is taken on trips to Europe and is exposed to different things and expands their mind? All of these things are important. And her response up to this point is to essentially, it sounds like, evade the question as to whether or not subgroup performance is going to be part of the calculation in terms of assessing the performance of schools.
Wow, people's economics and social status, it's a hell of a thing to bring up in a discussion on education.
But her last response, push it back a little bit, suggests to me that she has no idea what the question is, that she doesn't have any idea of what he's talking about and does not even have enough knowledge to bullshit about it. And it's really the way that she is responding to this is like that old kids joke where it's like one kid says to another kid, "What time is it?" And the other kid says, "I don't know. I don't know how to tell time, but I know it's not 5 o'clock. And the other kid says, "Why? How do you know it's not 5 o'clock?" "Well, because I'm supposed to be home at 5.
Compliance with the law which requires them to address achievement gaps.
Again, sir, all of the plans that I have approved follow the law as this body passed.
Well, are you going to answer the question? How do you address an achievement gap if subgroup performance isn't addressed?
It is addressed as required by the law.
How is that?
Whatever the law states, it requires.
What does the law state?
The plans that I have approved follow the law as this body passed.
And what is the requirement?
If the question is what the law does not include that you might have wished it did, I will not add to the law. I will follow the law.
I'm just asking you what you think the law is that you're following.
The Every Student Succeeds Act as passed by this body.
Right, and based on subgroup performance, the states are required to reduce the achievement gap. I'm just asking you, how can you do that if you don't calculate the subgroup performance?
Well, we certainly hope that every state will not only do what the law requires, but will go above and beyond and work to close the achievement gap for every student that they serve within their state.
Without
The gentleman's time has
performance.
expired.
Saved by the bell. Here's why I think it's not only is it just evil, it's also ignorance. Because she could say what the law says. I don't know what the law says in terms of how you assess the achievement gap. Do you to what extent do you bring in subgroup performance and that? But I'm not the Education Secretary of the United States of America, and I did not anticipate going into work today and having to testify in front of Congress. If she knew what the law was, she would say, well, the law clearly says that it's up to the states to assess that. We don't have the ability to force them to do so. Or the law says X, Y, or Z or something, but she doesn't know. I don't even think she knows what he was referring to be honest with you.
Maybe she's not following the law.
She very well may not be following the law, but I don't even think she's aware that she wouldn't be following the law. I don't think she's read the law.
I think either dumb Betsy or smart Betsy, whichever one it is, what she's basically saying is like, if you have a problem with it, just sue the state and we'll deal with it then with some of Trump's judges.
I think Matt's opining very well there. And I wonder if he was educated in a religiously oriented charter school.
There you go. Your education secretary, ladies and gentlemen.
Why would you study subgroups? It's not the group that suffers as a student, but the individual.
There you go.